Remember back when you were younger and your parents taught you normal social habits? They taught you about saying please and thank you. They instructed you not to hit or push or use mean words. But one of the most important things they taught us was to share. These social habits are normal parts of social development in every single one of our lives. We may have even received a report from a teacher that noted how well we used our manners or how well we played with others or shared. And as we've grown, however, it's increasingly tougher to continue these things. One of the most difficult continuing practices for me is sharing. When I was a kid, I had a real problem with sharing. I never wanted anyone to come over to my house because I didn't want my stuff to get ruined or broken. I threw a fit when people came over or would hide my toys or video games or whatever, just so my stuff would stay nice and neat. I closed the door to my room, so it was kind of a sign to stay out. There's stuff in here that's really important and you don't need to get into it. Now, maybe you've taken a similar approach or action to protect your stuff. Or maybe you were burned by sharing and you vowed to never do it again. You were kind and shared an item or let someone borrow an item, but when you got it back, it wasn't new or nice or even the same as when you remembered. It was scratched, dented, stained, broken, maybe even ruined. Maybe you were taken advantage of, and from that time on, you decided that sharing was no longer part of your life. We all have things that are important to us, and we don't want it to lose value. We have stuff that's really cool, and we want those things to continue to be cool, not old and worn out. We have possessions that make us feel comfortable, and if they're gone, we might not know what to do without them. In this series, Get Off Your Donkey, we've been talking about how this story that Jesus tells to these religious leaders is one that there's a man. He was beaten, he was robbed and left for dead. A person after person passed by and chose not to help him. A priest, he walked by, he passed on the other side of the road and didn't offer any help. A church worker did the same thing and didn't offer any help either. But a Samaritan man saw him and displayed an amazing amount of generosity. Let's take a look one more time at this story in Luke 10. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Now it's important to understand that the good guy was a Samaritan. The wounded guy is Jewish, and Jews and Samaritans were enemies. Jews and Samaritans liked each other about as much as pro wrestling fans like reading books. Jesus shocks the listeners of the story when he mentions that the Samaritan takes care of the Jewish man. That's the big twist in this story, and nobody sees it coming. So the big shocker, the stereotypical bad guy, the person who had every reason in the world to do nothing for the wounded guy, does everything he can, short of sitting by his bedside and nursing him back to health all by himself. Actually, he even did that the first day. But starting the second day, he pays for the innkeeper to do it. So the Samaritan goes way out of his way to help this wounded guy. Now let's be honest. We've heard the story of the Good Samaritan more times than we can remember over the years. And you're probably thinking, I am so sick of this story. And here we are in the 5th week of this series. But here's something I bet you never knew about this story. It's known as the story of the Good Samaritan, but Jesus never once calls the guy good. He's just called a Samaritan. No one called him the Good Samaritan. So why do we call this the story of the Good Samaritan? It may be that he was a good person who helped someone. But out of all the words in the English language, why choose the word good? Why not call him the brave Samaritan or helpful Samaritan or mind-blowingly awesome Samaritan? Well, it's actually not in the Bible. It might say that as kind of a page break thing in the translation you have, but that page break heading type stuff, well, it wasn't originally in the Bible when the words of Jesus were first written down. Somebody later on decided to call it the story of the Good Samaritan. And I think to call him just good suggests that what he did, Well, because he was a good person, that's just not enough. And I'm not suggesting he wasn't a good person, but being a good person to me just sounds watered down. Just about everyone thinks he or she is a good person, right? I mean, you probably think you're a good person. I'm not saying that you're not, but you probably think that about yourself. Well, how many times have you heard someone say, well, I'm not perfect, but I'm basically a good person? In that sense of the word, good is like nice or morally good. It's someone who usually does the right thing. And sure, this man was good. He was nice. But Jesus doesn't tell the story because the man was simply good or nice. I want to suggest the guy should have been known as the generous Samaritan. Okay, so the generous Samaritan doesn't quite have the same ring to it, and it doesn't roll off my tongue very well, but I believe generous is a much better word for what he did when he got off his donkey to help. Let's take a look at the ridiculous ways he displays this generosity. Number one, when the Samaritan got off his donkey, he was generous with his time. He had no idea how much time it was going to take to help this guy, but he clearly wasn't somebody who always looked at his watch to see if he had time to bless somebody in need. He just got off his donkey and took whatever time it would take to meet the man's need. Look, he was coming back on a business trip, and he wasn't concerned about his schedule because the person needed help. He was generous with his time. And number two, he was generous with his stuff. He bandaged the guy up, which probably meant making bandages out of his own clothes. There wasn't a first aid kit kind of stashed away in the hindquarters of his donkey. Odds are that he tore up whatever clothes he planned to wear. Or maybe he wore them on the business trip. And maybe it was his favorite shirt or cloak or pants. He didn't care, and you know why? Because he wanted to do whatever it took to take care of this man. But he also used oil and the wine to treat the guy's wounds. And that stuff was really valuable. Oil could be used for all sorts of things, and wine was, well, it was wine. He didn't just use water, he used wine. And who knows, it might have been some really good wine, some of the pricey stuff, but he didn't care, and you know why? He was generous with his stuff. But he was also generous with his donkey. Yeah, you can laugh about that. He puts the guy on his own donkey and walks the distance to the inn so the guy can ride. He didn't have to do that. He could have ridden to a nearby town on his own donkey and sent back help, go find the guy that's almost dead on the side of the road, but he didn't do that either. He lets the wounded guy ride on his donkey, and you know why? He was generous with his stuff. Here's another one. He was generous with his money. The Samaritan was generous with his money. Listen to this ridiculous generosity. He paid for the guy to have a room where he could recuperate and meals and care from the innkeeper. Jesus said he paid the innkeeper 2 denarii. Now, a denarii is plural for denarius, and a denarius in those days were the equivalent of 1 day's pay. So right up front, he gave away 2 days' pay to bless the wounded guy. Why? He was generous with his money. He even tells the innkeeper that he'll come back and pay more if more is needed. He isn't worried about the cost. He's not even concerned that he'll be taken advantage of or scammed. Why? He was generous with his money. When we begin to view this story as one of generosity and not just being good, it challenges us. This isn't a story about being a good person by helping people when we can. This isn't about just being good at all. Getting off your donkey isn't about being a good person. It's about being generous. And you may be thinking that this kind of generosity isn't possible. There's no way that you would be able to take care of anyone's needs such as these. But listen to a few stories of generosity that you may be able to do. Today, at a local convenience store where I work, an elderly man with a guide dog came in. He went to the aisle with the greeting cards, picked up a card and held it extremely close to his face and struggled to read it. And just as I was about to walk over to him to help him, a big truck driver asked him if he needed assistance reading, and then proceeded to read him almost every single greeting card out loud until the elderly man smiled and said, "That's perfect. My wife will love that one." Here's another one. Today I watched from the car as my teenage son walked into the front door of the school. He stopped and held the door open for the girl behind him who was in a wheelchair. Here's another one. Today, I work at a college where one of our commuter students lost her house in a fire. She has 3 children, including a 3-year-old boy. I offered to donate some of my 4-year-old son's clothes that no longer fit him. After bagging up the clothes and explaining that the clothes were going to be given to a little boy whose house burned down, my son went and got 2 of his toy Matchbox cars. He put them in a bag and said now he'll have some toys to play with too. When was the last time you or I did anything for anyone that cost that much time, that much stuff, that much money, or even that much of our reputation? Sure, we give a bunch of money away every year to this church and great organizations such as Food Fight and supporting kids in third world countries. But when was the last time that we helped someone in a way that cost us time, stuff, and money like the way it did the generous Samaritan? Look, I don't feel good about my stinginess and selfish actions. But I'm not saying that to put myself down. It's just to say that I don't think I ever understood the story through the lens of generosity until now. And look, it's changing me. If I want to live a life off my donkey, if you want to live a life off your donkey, we don't need to be just good people. We've got to be generous. And today is known as Celebration Generosity. It's not known as Celebration Goodness. And every person here has the ability to show some ridiculous generosity.